To MS 505 at ASU. My name is Jay Beeks and I'll be your instructor for this course. The purpose of this video is to give you an idea of who I am, a little bit about my background, and just a general introduction. One of the things I'd like to get going early on is to set up some phone calls with all of you so I can have more of a one-on-one discussion about why you're in the course, your aspirations, your background, the things that you hope to get out of the course, and that type of thing. And that helps me quite a bit when we're doing most of this work through the computer and we don't get a lot of face-to-face interaction. So I would appreciate if I could set up a phone call with each of you. A little bit about myself. I live in Beaverton, Oregon. And by the way, I originally graduated from the University of Arizona, and I'm sorry to mention that, but I'm a Wildcat fan, although now that I'm working for ASU, at least part-time, I'm starting to warm up a little bit to the Sun Devils. But I graduated from the U of A in mechanical engineering back in 1979, so I've been mostly working since then. My first job was at a power plant in Laughlin, Nevada, living in Bullhead City, Arizona, in a little single-wide mobile home, and I'll get to that in a minute because that's kind of an interesting story in my life. So my wife and I live here in Beaverton, Oregon. My wife works as in emergency psych services at the hospital here, just about a mile up the road. My daughter has a naturopathic clinic in about 15 miles from here in Tualatin, and my son is a park ranger with National Parks. A little bit about my management background. I've been a manager since about 1986, and I got out of school in '79. I was actually it was probably before that. It was more like '84. And so a little bit about this story at Mojave. Those of you that are familiar with Bullhead, you know that's one of the hottest cities in the country. It used to get up to about 115 in the summer, and it was we would joke with each other and say, yeah, but it's dry heat. But it was so hot that we would be walking around, and you could only walk for about 150 feet in that kind of heat, and you would just be physically tired, even though at the time I was in my mid-20s. But it was just one of these pretty difficult places to work. I worked at the Mojave Generating Station. Some of you are familiar with the accident we had in 1986, which I was right in the middle of. This was a big power plant, Mojave Generating Station, owned by Southern California Edison. It was my first job out of college, and I'd majored in thermodynamics. I knew something about thermodynamics, but the whole power plant thing was pretty new to me. So this is a big 1,600 megawatt coal-fired generating station. It was the only inline coal slurry plant in the world where we would actually pipe in slurry from the Navajo Indian Reservation, northern central Arizona, and we would pipe this coal slurry, which was about 50% water, 50% coal, down to Mojave. And then we would take that slurry and we would run it through centrifuges and then through mills, and then we would blow this coal into the boiler. These boilers were pretty large. They were about, each were about 8 stories high. We had a big turbine deck in front. These were 2 mirrored units. So you had a unit 1 and a unit 2, and then you had this turbine deck in front of it. And it was a dangerous place to work. In fact, one of the reasons I really like renewable energy, and I started getting into renewable energy in the mid-90s with wind farms and solar farms, but I was actually involved in it even in the late 80s with Southern California Edison with Solar One, is that renewable energy plants are extraordinarily safe, particularly if you're talking about a photovoltaic plant with just PV cells. That's about the safest work environment I can think of for a power plant. And wind is also incredibly safe. It's a little bit risky climbing up to the top of a wind tower and doing maintenance on the turbine, but you're strapped off. At least you're not dealing with the kinds of heat and pressure and things that we deal with in power plants. Just to give you an idea, the Mojave Generating Station operated at 4,000 pounds pressure and 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So that was a supercritical power plant. The nuclear plant that I worked at, San Onofre, I also worked at San Onofre and I worked at Trojan. Those plants operated at significantly lower pressure and temperature. They're saturated steam, so they're operating around 1,000 psi as opposed to 4,000 psi. But all of these plants, fossil plants, I've worked at oil, gas, coal, nuclear, they're all incredibly dangerous places to work, and it's a miracle that I'm sitting here in front of you today because of some of the accidents that I came very close to losing my life in at these plants. So just to give you an example, in June of 1986, I was a lead engineer at Mojave, and I had a group of about 6 individuals, other engineers working with me, and we were doing a performance test on both units. And the performance test on those units means that it's called a wide open valve test. So you open up the turbine valves wide open, and you try to get as much power as you can out of the unit. And meanwhile, while you're doing that, you're running all these pressure and temperature tests. I had people downstairs at what's called a test bench taking measurements. I was in the control room taking measurements in the control room, sort of mixing myself in with the operators and the shift supervisors. And then I had people spread out all over the plant taking readings, all pressure and temperature readings around the plant. And then within a week or so afterwards, we were going to pull all this information together and we would determine the exact efficiency of that particular boiler. And so we had finished the test on one unit, on unit 1, and we had moved over to unit 2. So unit 1, we'd taken off some of the pressure. It was now running about 750 megawatts. And unit 2, we had cranked up to 800 megawatts, which was its peak capacity. And we're taking these tests, and I had this strange sensation, a feeling. I had an overwhelming desire to ask the ship supervisor a question, because one of my engineers had come in and told me that he was having a problem knowing if this particular valve was open. And I remember the name of the valve. It was called a steam seal diverting valve. So it's a valve that dumps excess steam into the condenser and to the low pressure, from the low pressure turbine to the condenser. So I went up to the shift supervisor and I asked him about this, and I said, do you know if this steam seal diverting valve is open or not? He says, well, I can't tell you from here. And normally a shift supervisor wouldn't give an engineer like me the time of day, by the way. This guy was named Bob Wildman. But he said, well, I don't know, Beeks, let's go take a look. So we left the control room, and fortunately for us, we walked over to the unit that we were not doing the test on, and we were walking out on what's called a mezzanine deck, which was about 3 levels high off the ground. And when we walked out there, we were heading towards this valve, and all of a sudden, the plant literally blew up underneath our feet. And the other unit had a rupture in the hot reheat pipe. This is about a 30-inch pipe, and the pipe, which was shaped like this, suddenly opened up like a pancake and blew down the control room wall and literally pressure cooked everybody that was in the control room. And I had been in that control room for about 8 hours before that happened. And so the sound of it was like a sonic boom. It shook Bob and I and knocked us down to the ground. And then we both walked back to the control room, and it was total mayhem. We'd lost over 10 people that had been literally cooked. And we had about another dozen that were seriously burned, and we had to pull these people off the boiler, get them down on the ground, get ambulances, get water on them, and that type of thing. But it was a miracle that both Bob and I survived. In fact, he wouldn't have survived if I hadn't asked him the question, and I wouldn't have survived if he hadn't been kind enough to go with me out to look at the valve. So that's a story of how things could have transpired and they didn't transpire. One of the things I discovered from that, though, is that my management style is not exactly conducive to an all-out emergency like that. And even though I don't like working for a top-down command and control type manager, I realized at that point when everything just sort of falls apart that there is a need for that type of a manager. So about this course, one of the things I'll mention too is that one of the difficult things about being a manager, for me, the most difficult thing about being a manager is having to deal with personnel problems. And it's ironic to me because when I studied mechanical engineering at the U of A, my whole idea was that I was going to be working with equipment and with things and designing things and doing things on a drafting board and that type of thing, lots of analysis. But I didn't think that I was going to have to be working around a lot of people. And the first thing that I realized was that I'm thrown in with a group of a bunch of other engineers. I'm surrounded by people all day long, and then when I get promoted into management positions, I realize, well, this engineering is really all about people, which was surprising to me because it was something that I think, unwittingly trying to avoid. But that's really what management is. It's all about dealing with people, and one of the hardest things about being a manager is you have to deal with personnel problems. And frankly, that's one of the things I try to shy away from, but they just come at you. So if you've got people working for you, my last job with the state of Oregon, I had about 22 people working for me. They will just literally stream in the door with personnel problems, anything from a DUI to, well, you name it. They just bring their stuff to work, and that ends up being kind of the challenging thing about being a manager. About my management style, I've tried to be what I call a strategic transformational leader. I've attempted to be a visionary, systems thinking, holistic type of a person, enabling other people, being customer service oriented, and trying to create an adaptive culture that is flexible and personal for the people that work with me. And for the most part, I've been very successful at that. And I think as we start going through these assessments in this class, we'll find out that there's advantages to this type of management style. There's some things about it that aren't ideal for certain situations, such as a situation when a power plant blows up and you need a command and control type leader. I mean, I was in there in the thick of things, helping people as much as I could, but what we really needed was somebody to just direct, okay, you do this, you do that, you do this, and just kind of get things lined up. And we didn't have anybody on the ground at that time that was doing that. So there are goods and bads with every type of management style, and I think as we get through this course, it'll become very apparent why we really need to know who we are, what we're good at, where our weaknesses are, and then adapt ourselves as best we can to the management job that we have, and also to work on those areas. I was never really a people person when I was studying mechanical engineering, but I had to become much more of a people person as time went on, and now I'm comfortable around large groups of people, but it's certainly not the way I started out. So there's a lot to cover in this course. I won't belabor this issue too much. I just wanted to welcome you all to the course and let you know that I'm very glad to be here. I'm very glad to be teaching at ASU. I teach at a couple of other online schools at Merrillhurst University and at Franklin Pierce University, and it's all graduate level sustainability type courses. But I look forward to working with all of you, and I hope we'll have some interesting interactions on the phone. And I'll send out some kind of announcement about that, about times and dates and phone numbers and that type of thing. So I look forward to talking to you, and I hope you all really enjoy this course.